Hi everyone, in this video we're going to be working with functions again, but unlike last time where we took in parameters and we just printed out the result within that function, in this video we're going to be returning a value from a function which we can go and then display it out in the main program and not inside the function like we did in our last video. So this video is going to be pretty similar to our previous video, so if you haven't seen that, I would suggest to watch that first. And as you can see, we have this hello at the top. We can take this out because we no longer need it. And then we have four different variables, num1 to num4. And then we have our function. Our function is called addNums, and it currently takes in two values. So we could change these to num1 and num2 rather than having them num3 and num4. It doesn't matter, we're going to change it back at the end of the video to make sure the program works for both. And once we define our function here, addNums, we take in two parameters. This is n1 and n2. Keep in mind that this n1 and n2 is nothing got to do with the names of these functions here. So for example, this here, instead of n1, it could be anything. We could call this x and we could call our second value y, and if we did that we would have to replace this here with x and y, and if we go and run this now we can see that we get our result as 11 and then world shows up as well. So in this program world is not actually needed, so we can also get rid of this. But I'm going to change my variables back to n1 and n2 because I think it makes a little bit more sense than having x and y. X and y doesn't really mean anything, at least n stands for number. So now that we've changed that back, I'm just going to go and run it again to make sure that it's still working. And you can see that I don't get the right result, so I made a little typo here. It should be n1 plus n2. And that's why it's always really important to keep running your program, because you might know what the mistake is and you want to change it to something, and when you go and change it, like myself, you make a little bit of a typo and then you end up getting the wrong result, and then that could lead to more problems later on down the line and you've wasted more time debugging. So it's always a good idea to keep running your code, keep seeing the output to make sure that you are getting the values that you should be getting. So the next thing I want to talk about is returning a value. So for example, we could return n1 in this example, right? So if we're going to return a number, we don't really want our console log here, or we could keep it in. So I'm just going to keep it in for now, and I'm going to use the return keyword. And after return, I'm going to put in whatever value I want to return. So in this case, I want to return n1. So n1 will be returned to this function call here. Now, the problem with me returning a value from this function addNums, it's not going to be stored in anything. So what we could do is we could go and console log this whole function call that we've made here, and the output that we should get is n1. So if I go and run this, we can see that our output is 11 because we're getting our 11 from this function here, because this function is called first, and then we're returning n1. Now n1 is 5. If we look up here, that's what we're passing in. We're passing in num1, which is 5. Then we're changing that num1's name to n1 in this function, and then at the end of this function we're returning n1 to wherever it was called, and it was called here on line 7. And to actually see what return value we get, we have to use a console log. So that's why we have a console log and our addNums function inside of it. We could also assign this function to a variable. So I could just say res, short for result, and I'll define that as a let, and after res is our variable name, just the same way as this is num3 or this is num4. this is just a variable name, and I can get rid of that bracket at the end as well because it's no longer needed. And if we go and run this now, we won't see 5, okay, but 5 will be stored in this res. So if I go and hit run, we can see the number 11 gets displayed. So if I want to now make sure that res does in fact hold the number that we're returning, n1, which should be 5, we can do a console log. So I'll say console.log, and I'll put the variable res inside our console log, and if I go up here and run our program again, we get the output 11 and 5. So we don't really want this console log here anymore, so we don't want it to console log 11 inside the function. We want to go and return our value. So I'm just going to get rid of this now, and as you can probably guess, since I've deleted this line from add nums, the only number that gets displayed now is 5. We don't want to just return n1, we want to return the combination of n1 plus n2. So what we could do is we could create a const, and we could set this const equal to a variable. It could be anything. I'm just going to call my variable return value, and I'm going to set that value equal to n1 plus n2. And now I'm no longer going to return n1, but I'm going to return my return value variable. And if I go up here and run this again, I get the output as 11, because that's what the total of n1 and n2 are. So if I was to change the numbers that I was passing in, so instead of num1 and num2, maybe if I put num3 and num4 in here, I should get a different result. So if I go up here and run again, I get the output as 25. And that's what the total of num3 and num4 are equal to. So the next thing I can do to just clean this code up a little bit more is, rather than defining our const return value here and then setting this as our return value, we could just return n1 plus n2. So if I copy this and I paste this in here, and now I'm going to delete this line because I no longer need it, and I go up here again and hit run and run without debugging, I get the answer 25. So this is a really simple example. We're only passing in a couple of numbers and we're only just adding the two of them together. So it would be a good idea to get used to this simple functionality of functions. So creating a function, being able to call that function, being able to pass in parameters, and then of course be able to return values from the function. In our next video, we're going to talk about recursion, where a function has the ability to call itself.